Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict Triathlon Podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors PrecisionHydration.com, who offer electrolyte drinks in different strengths to match how you sweat. You can personalize your hydration strategy today at PrecisionHydration.com and get a free box or tube of pH worth up to $9.99 using the code OxygenAddict. And we're also brought to you by Thriver.co, where you can take your health tracking to a new level with an at-home personalized finger prick blood test. You can get £30 off your first test with the code OxygenAddict30. So hi there everybody, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby. It's just me this week, and stick around to the end of the show. I'm gonna be making a bit of an announcement there about what's going on with the show. But for now, what I want to do is I want to say we have got a great show lined up for you today. I've been really lucky. I've been chasing this guy for absolutely months and possibly years to get him onto the show. He will be no stranger to a lot of you. He is Paul Newsome from SwimSmooth. Now, Paul was one of the first characters I came across when I moved into professional coaching, who I looked at within his swim coaching system and thought, this guy is a genius. And I really believe that to this day. I think he's got such a unique way of coaching athletes and such a unique way of looking at things. 10 years ago, I did one of his first SwimSmooth coaching courses in the UK, and I was blown away by his approach to swim types and his approach to categorizing swimmers, and his clear and pure way of sort of saying, right, we tend to have different types of swimmers, and these kinds of swimmers tend to have these kind of characteristics. They tend to have these kind of flaws. These flaws can be fixed with these drills. And I left that course that day with a kind of like a blueprint for, I can now go into a club swimming session and look at people and have a way of categorizing them and thinking, great, I can now fix the stroke flaws that these people have with tons and tons of confidence. And since then, SwimSmooth and Paul have gone on to become the leading provider of swim education resources within both the British Triathlon coach education system and the ITU coach education system as well. So they're recognized worldwide for this fantastic approach they've got to swim coaching. So it's super to catch up with him. I managed to get him on for an hour, so we've got a really nice long episode today. And it goes all the way through his swim coaching system. And what I'm hoping is for you as listeners, you can listen along and think to yourself, right, the kind of swim type he's describing there sounds like me. So therefore, the kind of flaws that I feel like I've got are these ones, and these are the kind of drills that are going to fix that. So again, listen out to the end of the show. We've got a whole bunch of resources and links you can go to that are going to let you take this episode and take it home and hopefully go away and improve your swimming. Now, just before we go into the interview, a shout out to our sponsors, PrecisionHydration.com. Like many of you, I have been, now it's November in the wintertime, I've been getting myself back onto the turbo with the head down. And I'm one of these athletes who suffers horribly with cramp. Long-time listeners will know my history of having an incredibly high salty sweat rate. So I lose somewhere in the region of 1,600 milligrams of sodium for every litre that I sweat out. So it's about double what most normal people sweat. I got on the turbo the other day to do an FTP session, forgot to get pH in the bottle, and I thought to myself stupidly, it's not going to be a problem, I'll just drink water through this. And I just about got to the last minute of my last minute of the 6x5 minute interval session. My right calf completely locked up. I managed to stop and stretch it out, and then my left calf locked up. It was just a hideous horror show. So don't make the mistakes that I make as an athlete. Follow the advice I give as a coach. Get that precision hydration sorted out into your bottles and match how you sweat so you've got the right amount of electrolytes in your bottle so you're replacing what you lose within sweat. So if you don't know what that is, take their simple online sweat test over at precisionhydration.com, and if it gives you a lead that you're particularly heavy or salty, you can actually see them in person like I did, have an in-person sweat test done, and they'll tell you exactly how much sodium you're losing and exactly what your sweat rate is. And if you've never tried them before, it's a risk-free trial. You get a free box or tube worth up to $9.99 using the code OxygenAddict. All right, and with that, we're going to hand us over to today's interview of the week with Paul Newsome from SwimSmooth. All right, so it is really, really great to welcome Paul Newsome from SwimSmooth.com onto the show. Paul, how are you doing today?
Hey, and yourself?
Really good, thanks, mate. Really good, yeah. I'm very excited to have you on. I think you are, without doubt, the certainly in my view, the world's leading swim coach, certainly for triathletes. And
Wow,
as I've
that's a big statement. Thanks, Rob.
well, I don't know many.
I'll pay you later. I was going to say you don't know many, but yeah, I'll pay you later.
Well, as I said in the intro here, like it was a big part of my transition from being a teacher to becoming a full-time triathlon coach was going on the coach ed course that you and Adam ran in the early days. It was probably back in 2010, I think.
That's correct.
And yeah, going on that course and sitting and going, the gulf between where I was and where you guys were. I learned so much firstly, but you guys were so professional, and you had such a for my kind of organized and systematic brain, the way you organized swimmers fall into these categories, and they tend to have these kind of problems and they tend to have these kind of fixes. And I was like, this is exactly what I need to know as a new coach starting out who, I taught years and years of kids swimming, but as we both know, coaching adult swimming and teaching kids swimming are both very, very different things. So I remember sitting there like a sponge and sucking up pretty much everything that you guys said that day. So first up, it's great to have the chance to get you on and officially thank you for the effect that you guys have had in my life and my career, really.
Wow. Okay, that's really lovely to hear. Actually, it's you go along. I'm still coaching day to day over here in Perth. Literally coaching full time as a swimming coach for, like you say, mainly for triathlon, open water swimming and stuff. But it's the coach education stuff that we do, myself and Adam and the rest of the team. Emma Brunning up there in the Lake District and the rest of the SwimSmooth team. We've got 50 coaches dotted around the world now. We're constantly trying to grow that and just working with
That's
other.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really grown. Believe it or not, that course would have been one of the first ones that we ever ran, which was the first one was Aston University, June 2010, like you mentioned there. Funny enough, I actually had two people fly over from Birmingham this morning for a video analysis session. I was just chatting to them about, oh my God, I've never really spent much time in Birmingham at all, apart from running our very first coach education course there at Aston University in 2010. So. But yeah, it's that's what keeps me pumped up. I love doing the coach education stuff, being able to chew the fat with the coaches, and like you say, just sort of sharing the system a little bit. My brain's always thought a little bit like that, about being systematic with approach to it. And I think when we released the swim type system, which you were sort of leaning towards there back in 2010, it was quite a nerve-wracking thing for me personally to do, because I've been seeing these trends and categories, if you like, that swimmers actually seem to fall in. And back in 2010, I'd already been doing video analysis at that point for around about 12 years. I think I'm in my 22nd year now of video analysis. And
wow.
when you see, when you see literally, as I have now, tens of thousands of swimmers over the years, and you've worked with them, obviously we are all individuals. And when myself and Adam actually met each other on TriTalk on the training forums, I don't really contribute to that anymore, but when we did meet each other on TriTalk, I was always trying to bang this drum about the individual approach to swimming and to coaching of swimmers and triathletes. And we have a sort of internal memo, if you like, which is coach the swimmer, don't coach the stroke, as it were. So what we really mean by that is there is no such thing as a SwimSmooth stroke. It's basically we're trying to sort of get the best out of every individual, and everyone is individual. But when you actually start to look at huge volume, huge data, if you like, big data of a massive volume of swimmers, you do start to recognise these trends. And I started to recognise those as far back as 2008, which is when Adam sort of joined me with SwimSmooth, and I first proposed the idea to him. In fact, I've actually still got the notebook where I actually sketched it all out. And the swim types names, which we'll go into in a moment, they weren't exactly as we've got them now, but the same sentiment was there, if you like. I remember showing this to Adam, and he just goes, "That won't work. People don't think like that." And I was like, "Well, just listen to me a little bit. Let me talk you through it." And I said, "You remember John? John swims like this." And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "And it sort of looks a little bit like Pat, and he swims a little bit like, yeah." And then you got Jane, and she tends to struggle with this. And have you noticed how Lucy does the same thing? And he says, yeah. So then we started formulating it a bit, but it wasn't until 2 years later that we actually formally released it. And we released it as this coach education course because we wanted to make sense of individuality, if you like, but in a way which is still systematic enough that a coach could follow it. So rather than just saying, hey, everybody's an individual, there's a million different shades of grey out there, it doesn't really give a new coach a framework to work with. So swim types itself was always just envisaged as a bit of a framework from which to start, because when the coaches invite themselves or apply for these for the coach education courses, I think we've done 35 of them around the world now, so it's over 600 coaches have done this course. When we do that and they apply for the course, most of them are actually saying, look, I can recognize faults. I can see them all the time, but I just don't know which order to put them in. I don't know where to start with this particular swimmer and where to start with that. And I might have even seen what you classify as the Arnie, but I don't necessarily know the process behind it. So that's what we started out with. That was the framework, was to create a system whereby other coaches could learn how to simplify the stroke correction process, and then ensure that they're giving swimmers a nice sound pathway to follow. And even when I'm working on a day-to-day basis, I won't necessarily go into the depth of calling somebody, hey, you're an Arnie, or you're an Overglider, or you're a swinger, or something like that. I will if I think the tone is right to have that conversation with the swimmer. But ultimately, I'm just trying to actually correct every swimmer on an individual basis, and my framework is the swim type system.
It's a really good explanation, and I really love how partly it comes down to the way that you can then help educate swim coaches and triathlon coaches in how to get people to be better swimmers. But I also love how athletes can self-identify within this system, because I think triathlon's quite unique in that so many people in the sport are so driven to improve themselves. And I don't think there's a sport quite like it, maybe outside of golf, where perhaps including golf, where people are really driven. I think golfers will go and have a lesson with a pro and they'll get told what to do. Triathletes tend to read and watch and try and find all the information they can to help get themselves better. So definitely. I know so many athletes who've watched your videos or who have, used the swim type thing to try and help themselves improve. And it's great you mentioned Emma Brunning there. She's a fantastic coach. I've worked with Emma a few times on the British Triathlon coach education system, and to see the light. I mean, she's one of those like Duracell bunny types who's always on anyway, but when she starts teaching coaches how to coach swimming, the light comes on in her eyes, and it's amazing to watch the trainee coaches kind of go, well, swimming's really complicated, and especially the ones who've come through the old ASA system of exactly like you said, coach the stroke. Here's the hierarchy, blab T or whatever.
God.
To kind of go to like,
we could do a whole podcast about that.
Well, yeah, let's stay away from that one, eh? Yeah. But I love the idea of going away from that, going, well, there's a way to coach each individual swimmer, and individual swimmers tend to fall into categories. So here are some ways that they tend to be similar. Here are some faults they tend to all have. Here are some ways to fix that.
That's right.
So that's brilliant. So just for like a lot of our audience are in the UK, if you're looking for getting sorted out with swim instruction, swim coaching, I've sent loads of my athletes to see Emma for one-to-one swim analysis, and she is brilliant. So we'll make sure we give a plug for Emma and her how
that'd be great
about her and your other coaches as well at the end.
So Emma's probably spent more time on the pool deck with us than pretty much any other coach out there. So every year when we train up our certified coaches, she comes and spends 2 weeks with us over here in sunny Perth, and she mentors them through the whole process basically. So that's great, because it's one of the things is over in Perth, I'm trying to demonstrate the squad program that I run over here and do the one-to-one sessions. And we want the coaches to sort of see a real living, breathing, successful swimming squad working in action. So it's hard for me to step out of the role of actually coaching the swimmers at the time. So Emma and Adam both team up and actually then coach the coaches and mentor them through it and stuff. So Emma's been a true asset for sure.
It's funny because Emma and I did like a selection weekend together to be chosen as tutors for the BTF, and we're on this course together and having that little chat as you do when you first get to meet people over coffee. And she said, I've literally just come back from Perth. Did she sleep on your couch or sleep in your basement or something when she was over there?
She sleeps in many different places actually. Yeah, she's a wandering spirit, and she won't mind me sort of saying that. She's lived in some pretty cool places as well over the years, and she, as you know, she's a very lovable person, and everybody takes her under her wing when they come over here. So she's constantly like shifting and jumping between different places. Everybody wants to look after Emma while she's over here. So yeah.
She's the only person whose camper van is more messy than my camper van. I'll say that.
You got a camper van, have you? I need one. I definitely need one.
Oh, we'll talk about that off air. We can do a whole other show about that. All right, so listen, for the benefit of the listeners at home, what we decided we were going to try and put together here was we'll give an overview of your 6 different swim types. We'll talk a little bit about people's personalities and how that really plays in with people's different swim types as well, and then help people give an idea for what kind of faults they probably have and how they can probably fix them. So kick it off for us then. At what point did you start to realize then that you saw different swim types after you talked with Adam and you've worked out you need to sort of put together a classification system?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I started scribbling these ideas down, and internally we were relating to them. I think the 6 swim types, as they're officially known now, we have the Arnie, the Bambino, the Kicktastic, the Overglider, the Swinger, and the Smooth. But I think in the early stages, the Arnie, I think we were referring to him as him or her, I should say, because there is a male and female version of each one. But I think we're referring to the Arnie at that point as the struggler. So I think most coaches who might be listening to this, or swimmers themselves, if you feel like you're battling against the water, you're quite frustrated, maybe you are one of those people who is quite good on the bike and the run, and you just find swimming a wholly sort of frustrating process. And you know you're strong, you might be swimming a lot faster with the pool boy and with a wetsuit on than without, but you just feel like your legs are dragging through the water. That's very much what we classify as the Arnie swim type. So we called it the struggler in the early days, and we just put a sort of name to it because a lot of these athletes, whether male or female, do tend to be quite sort of generally speaking, quite sort of muscular. From a physiological perspective, these athletes tend to be quite good at sprinting or power type of thing. So if you suspect yourself as an Arnie, you might even recognize this when you're doing your bike and run intervals. You might be the guy or girl who can hold really big power on the bike for 2 or 3 minutes, but you know, an Ironman distance bike ride might be something which sort of fills you with dread. The interesting thing from that, and as you'll obviously appreciate, Rob, as well, from a physiological perspective, it's much easier to take somebody who has a good physiological profile for sprinting and do the right type of training with them to develop their aerobic capacity to be able to lengthen and go the distance, basically, as it is to take somebody who's a bit more of a one-pace pony. I'm definitely fitting into that bracket, and more of a diesel engine, as we call it, and it's a little bit harder to get that type of athlete to go the other way and sprint really hard. So yeah, that was our first type, and I think everyone can relate to that. If you're not the Arnie and you don't feel like you're dragging your legs and you haven't got and you don't swim loads faster with the pool boy, you might recognize yourself in one of the other types. But that's definitely a big broad section of the community. In fact, I think we've actually collected some data. I think we've got around about 31% of people who come to us tend to fall into that category there. We then got the Bambino. Now, Bambino or Bambi, we didn't want to get into trouble with Disney, obviously, calling it the Bambi. But Bambino obviously means new or young, and generally speaking, those first 2 swim types, the Arnie and the Bambino, they are your classic adult onset swimmers, if you like, who've probably got no swimming background whatsoever. Whereas the Arnie probably finds the process of learning to swim quite frustrating because they're quite type A, and quite driven, and they're always good at everything else, and why is swimming so much harder for them? Bambinos often feel a bit more sort of nervous and anxious about that approach. So the original name that we had for the Bambino was simply the slipper, and that's on account of the fact that a Bambino is very easy to spot in the pool. Usually their head is lifting very high to take a breath in, and it's usually on account of the fact that they feel quite sort of claustrophobic and want to be assured of getting some good air in. Now, unfortunately though, when they go to take a breath, usually their lead arm will actually collapse in the water, so it'll have no engagement whatsoever. So we used to refer to this as slipping that lead arm or dropping that lead arm, hence the name slipper. And eventually, we tried to formulate the whole system. We wanted to become this idea of Obviously, the classic Bambi on ice would be a little bit uncoordinated. Many Bambinos think of themselves as being a little bit uncoordinated. And, the thing is with this is sometimes especially if you're a male Bambino, you might look at our illustration of the Bambino and it does look a little bit timid and a little bit nervous, and nobody wants to sort of classify themselves necessarily into that bracket. However, we tried to make the whole system quite memorable, if that makes sense. And
totally.
It's not like a name and shame sort of thing. It's designed to be a little bit of fun. Some swimmers, as we'll talk about in a second, tend to you can almost see like a subtype, i.e. they used to be one type and they gravitated towards another, for example. But the idea with the Bambino is when you speak to somebody on that sort of level, that sort of nervous, a little bit timid, Bambinos will often tell you, I don't know if I'm in the right place. Maybe this is all a bit too much for me. And they'll often tell you about maybe some phobia they've had of water at a previous life. When you start to sort of classify it and say, hey, look, I've worked with Jane. She was like this and she struggled with the coordination. And you put it into that sort of context. Bambinos often recognize themselves in that. Whether or not you'd call that swimmer or even refer to yourself as a Bambino. A lot of people do. I'm a Bambino driver, as it happens, Rob. So I get very nervous reversing my car into the driveway, that type of thing. I'm not very coordinated with driving, as anyone will know who's ever been in a car with me. But anyway, yeah. So the Bambino lacks a little bit of coordination, lacks a little bit of rhythm. Will often feel like they're the slowest swimmer maybe in the race or slow swimmer in the squad or something like that. They might have only just gravitated away from breaststroke, for example. But we see by far and away, some of the best swimmers to actually work with are the Bambinos, because if you can get that sort of anxiety just calm down a little bit, it's great. And they're not Arnies can be sort of quite hard to coach sometimes, if you don't mind me saying. I like the challenge of working with Arnies, but I know a lot of coaches find it quite daunting because they feel like they're very demanding. Bambinos appear to be very, very grateful when you give them good coaching and stuff, and that's always a nice feeling for a coach to sort of walk away with, really. So if you're coaching a squad, and let's say you've got 3 lanes, you probably naturally, the way to naturally categorize your swimming lanes is by speed. And if you have 3 swimming lanes, a slow lane, a medium lane, and a fast lane, or as we like to say over here, fast, faster, and fastest, to keep it on a positive spin. So if you got that sort of first lane, the swimmers within your lane will generally be your Arnies and your Bambinos. Then over into the middle lane, you generally have your Kicktastics and your Overgliders. Now, Kicktastics are a really interesting swim type all in themselves. And the reason I like thinking about and working with Kicktastics is simply because if you ask most triathletes what they thought of wearing a wetsuit, most triathletes who are likely to chat about this are maybe your Arnies, who get a real boost from speed by wearing a wetsuit. And maybe if it's a Bambino might just sort of feel more reassured in the water. But there is a category of swimmer out there who says, I just don't get it with the wetsuit. Everyone gets so much faster. And yet I've spent £800 on this wetsuit or whatever it might be. and I don't really feel any faster at all. It feels really awkward and what have you. But there's a whole section of the community out there who just sit naturally really high and horizontal in the water. So if you like, the Kicktastic's almost the opposite of the Arnie in that respect. They sit really, really high, got a big, strong, powerful leg kick, and they're good athletes. They've often had a little bit of a swimming background, but they often get very, very frustrated by the fact that they don't seem to make the gains with the wetsuit. And they assume maybe it's the wetsuit, or they assume that maybe they're not strong enough in their arms, and they'll often reach out and grab a short sleeve wetsuit or what have you. But it's usually because their body profile in the water is so good that they don't need too much extra flotation. So consequently, when we helped Hoob design the Hoob wetsuit company back in 2011, it was my suggestion to put forward a wetsuit, a low buoyancy wetsuit specifically for Kicktastics, and it became one of the best-selling wetsuits that Hoob did. In the early days, it was called the Aura, and it was basically a low buoyancy wetsuit. And at that point, everyone was making massive buoyancy wetsuits, but totally disregarding this section of the community. So the Kicktastics loved the Hoob Aura wetsuit because it sort of suited their style very, very nicely. Now, you don't necessarily need to, that suit is fantastic. But let's say, for example, you're on a bit of a budget. You think you might be this Kicktastic. And another way to sanity check this is if you swim with a pool boy in a squad session, are you one of those swimmers who doesn't pick up too much speed and or even go slower with the pool boy?
Yeah.
So chances
This is
are
so good because, like, within our, sorry to interrupt you, but I was going to say
oh, no.
within our coaching group, people often post in our Facebook group and say, this has happened to me. And
Yep,
most swimmers get faster with a pool buoy, and most swimmers
that's
get
right.
faster with a wetsuit. And everybody assumes that's the case for everyone. And
It's
there
not.
is this
No, definitely not.
subset where people go, I'm so frustrated. I did that part of this set with a pull buoy and I
Yeah,
slow down, or I bought a wetsuit and I'm even slower. And people kind of go, well, that just can't be the case. Everyone
can't be
gets
right. You've got your
faster with.
numbers wrong or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's so good to
Yeah.
hear that from someone like you with such a background of seeing so many swimmers. I think so many people are going to listen to this and go, oh, I'm not alone.
That's right. That's right. And so what the Kicktastic, generally speaking, needs to do, you don't with the Kicktastic. So we call Kicktastic because they're often kicking quite strongly, albeit not many of them actually realise they're doing that. A lot of them will tell you that I'm just not strong enough in the shoulders, or my shoulders get really tired all the time, etc. But usually the way they're pulling through, Kicktastics often pull through with quite a deep, straight arm pull through, which requires the shoulders more than the chest and the lat. So consequently, what they're doing at the front is not only is it not efficient or effective, but it's also loading up the shoulders as well, giving them their impression or perception that they're not strong enough in the shoulders. If you can work to develop a Kicktastics catch and pull through, get them bending the elbow. We ran a really good blog a few years ago called Bend It Like Becky, after Becky Adlington. She's got a great catch underneath the water, bending her elbow and pressing the water back behind her. If you can get the Kicktastic to work on some catch and like sculling drills and doggy paddle drills and those sort of things, then there's no reason why you can't develop that catch and help them to tone their kick down. You don't want to kill the kick completely. Kicktastics will never really perform very well, with the example with a 2-beat leg kick, but you can get them to tone it down a little bit if you can improve their confidence on how they catch and pull through. The other classic mistake that a Kicktastic makes, when you mentioned there about how everyone assumes that everyone gets faster with a pull buoy or with a wetsuit, Arnie's classified by low sinking legs, lots of drag, i.e. the pull buoy and the wetsuit really helps. One of the ways to actually improve an Arnie typically is to get them to look a little bit more down towards the bottom of the pool, which can be, one of 4 or 5 ways to lift their legs higher in the water. A Kicktastic, if you do that, or if they've heard or been coached in a squad session, everybody look down to the bottom of the pool, get your bum and legs higher. That's only going to lift their bum and legs too high, and they end up going to kick thin air. And it's even worse with a wetsuit on. So Kicktastics definitely don't want to be looking down. They want to be looking forwards by about 45 degrees. And, I actually went and observed, it was actually one of the triathlon, Australian triathlon head coaches or junior coaches a few years back over here in Perth. And I was, if you excuse my French here, I was a bit shocked, to be honest with you, because he had this group of 5 female swimmers in the pool, and they were doing a demonstration for the coaches who were watching around. And 4 of these swimmers I would definitely have classified as Kicktastics, and one of them would have definitely been a female swinger, as we'll get onto in a moment. And the coach is yelling at all of them, get your head down, kick harder, get your head down, kick harder. And I'm like, what? Yeah. These are triathletes. What? And they're already sitting really high in the water, and you've got the big froth going on behind them. So just to play a bit of devil's advocate, naughty as I am, I said to him, mate, I said, how do these 5 swimmers go in the open water with a wetsuit? He says, well, these 4 at the back here, they're rubbish with a wetsuit on. The one at the front, who was the swinger, oh, she's fantastic, goes really, really well. And I said, so what did you think that is then? And he goes, oh, they're not strong enough. They need to get their head down and kick more. And I was like, my God, like the body position was already high enough as it was. And here they are just kicking complete thin air. And I was like, just think about the mechanics of this. It's a physics thing. It's not rocket science. Everyone can sort of appreciate. Yeah. It's not fitness. It's not strength in the shoulders or anything like that. If you put buoyancy on somebody who's already way too buoyant, it's just not going to work. So, and they're all looking down towards the bottom pool as well. Anyway, I digress, but this is the sort of stuff that you see on a day-to-day basis. And this is why I'm still very much engaged with the coaching even to this day, because I think there's a lot of coach education yet to be done, And that smoothly moves us on to hopefully the Overglider, the 4 swim type. And we've been accused over the years of mocking other swim programs over the years and stuff, because a lot of coaches over the years have practiced this whole idea of make your stroke longer and smoother and glide more and take fewer strokes per lap. And again, we're not mocking anybody with the Overglider swim type. We're simply recognizing what we see on a day-to-day basis. So the classic scenario with an Overglider is somebody who comes to you and tells you, I've been swimming for 4 or 5 years, 2 or 3 times per week. I'm doing, several Ks in a session, but I'm just not getting any faster. And they'll often say something. So I'll say, well, what do you do? And I do loads of technique work. I said, so what about the type of training? Oh, I don't do any training yet. My stroke's not perfect enough yet. I said, what do you mean? And they'll say, yeah, well, I've been trying to get my stroke count down. I said, why have you been trying to do that? And he said, well, I've heard somewhere also. Yeah, I read a book, a famous yellow book. And it told me that if I take less than 40 strokes per 50 meters, then I'll be more efficient. So I'm trying to get this number down. And we've seen people over the years who've turned up for these sessions with 28 strokes per lap in a 50-meter pool, and yet they're still swimming 2 minutes 30 per 100. And they're swimming shockingly bad because unfortunately, water is 800 times more dense than air. And this whole notion that if you can pause out in front of your head and glide for a little bit longer, that you'll take fewer strokes and therefore be more efficient is, again, pardon my French, total bullshit. We can demonstrate that that's actually the case. And just a couple of funny anecdotes on this one. Many overgliders believe that their stroke is efficient because it's long and it's smooth. We sat down for a beer with Alistair and Jonathan Brownlee a couple of years ago, and I was just playing devil's advocate, as you do. So Ali and Johnny would both be what we classify as pure swingers, like the thoroughbred swingers, as we'll get onto in a moment. So just as play devil's advocate, I said, what do you guys think about your strokes? And Johnny piped up and says, well, it's shit. I said, excuse me if you, I hope, maybe you can bleep that out there, Rob, but it's rubbish. He says, it's rubbish. And I said, what do you mean it's rubbish? Well, my stroke rate's too quick and I bashed the water a little bit. And I said, yeah, but you're Olympic silver medalist, Olympic bronze medalist sort of thing. And, Alistair was of the same sort of train of thought as well, is that they might not look particularly pretty, but they are obviously very, very effective and efficient at what they do there. So the Overglider is a bit of a tricky one, really, because the hardest win when you're coaching an Overglider is to sort of talk them out of the cul-de-sac that they found themselves on, to where they're still believing that they need to take fewer strokes per 50 meters. So interesting enough, an article in US Triathlete magazine by a coach called Sarah McClarty was put out a couple of years ago, in fact 2010 actually, and it was 7 tips on how to actually improve your freestyle swimming. And you can still search this and find it on Google online. Tip number 4 of how to swim more effectively was remember to glide. And she says, you need to make the stroke discontinuous instead of continuous, leave the arm to pause out in front of your head, let it glide, don't be a windmill. That was in 2010. 2015, the same coach posted another article, which was actually quoting me and my view and analysis of Alistair Brownlee versus Sun Yang, where she started to relent a little bit and say, well, actually, Paul Newsome says that stroke rate is important for the open water, especially for triathletes and good open water swimmers, because it allows them to maintain momentum. And then in 2016, she posted another article saying, don't let anyone tell you to glide. No, glide's terrible. You'll pause and you'll slow down. And the crazy thing was, I thought, well, fuck, I'm going to flag this because this is what we've been saying all along. And so I sort of pointed out, tried to be diplomatic about it and said, look, there's no wonder that people are confused out there when one person's telling them one thing, somebody else. And the problem is that the people who used to be saying one thing are now saying completely something else and disregarding what they did say without any acknowledgement of what they did say as being wrong. Yeah. So,
in a way you can look at that and go, isn't it fantastic that people can change over time and have new views? Absolutely. And the challenge with the internet is the things that you say and write stay out there forever, and you end up completely contradicting yourself. But if you can sort of say, look, I used to think this, and now 10 years on, I've seen more evidence that shows that. It's great for you, though, isn't it, to finally have another coach come around and go, yeah, actually, I think this is more true than that, having seen more swimmers.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think I'm her favourite person in the planet, though, for pointing it out. But this is the whole thing. I used to be a little bit shy about all this sort of stuff, and thinking, is it wrong to point somebody out who might have got it wrong potentially? And I'm not about that. We're not about that as a company. We're just trying to help as many swimmers and their coaches improve the way they do things, and just try to get them to actually think slightly more laterally about what they're talking about. And just because your coach and your coach's coach and your coach's coach has told you that lengthening out and taking fewer strokes per lap is better, doesn't necessarily mean to say it's the right thing. And you've got Adam Peaty there in the UK, the best breaststroker in the world, who's got the shortest stroke in the Olympic Games final. You've got Katie Ledecky, who's got the shortest stroke in the Olympic Games final. You know, there's Gregorio Paltrinieri, who's the men's world champion for 1500 freestyle, Olympic champion. And he's got the shortest stroke in the men's 1500 freestyle by around about 12 or 13 strokes over some of the Australians. But what they do is they've got the right stroke for themselves. And it goes back to what I said before about not coaching the stroke, coaching the athlete, and recognizing whether that's the right thing for them to do or not. And, you know, I know a lot of your listeners are going to be quite sort of techie, and just to put some numbers on that, and some science. So, I mean, take it or leave it for what I'm saying with any of this today. But you know, a lot of the work that I do is based on empirical research of just working with many thousands of swimmers and seeing it. But a study was actually done in 2010 over in Texas, which actually had a group of 16 collegiate swimmers swimming in a flume tank, like an endless pool, basically. And they worked out what the swimmers' threshold pace was. They turned the endless pool up to threshold pace. They worked out what their average stroke rate was at their threshold pace. And then they started to monitor heart rate and oxygen consumption. And what was really interesting was they started to manipulate the stroke rate. So the speed of the flume tank stayed the same. They either slowed the swimmer's stroke rate down or increased it. And they did 5 measurements, basically 10% below natural stroke rate, 20% below natural stroke rate, and then 10% above and 20% above. Now, if you slow somebody's stroke rate down and keep the speed of the pool the same, the swimmer has to swim with a longer stroke in order to stay at that speed.
Yeah.
So what was quite interesting was everyone would have assumed that if you can swim at the same speed but with a lower stroke count, because that's what everybody tells you, that you'll be more efficient. And yet this proper scientific study demonstrated that heart rate and oxygen consumption both increase in response to stroke rate decreasing below where it should be. And what the study was also investigating was kicking rate. So what you often see, or rather I should say you don't see, and this is the problem, is that when you view some of those beautiful looking swimmers on the internet, and you know, I'm sure we can all come up with examples of who we're thinking of there. But when you look at some of those beautiful looking freestyle swimmers who are demonstrating this perfectly smooth, technical freestyle sort of thing, taking few strokes per lap, and wow, isn't that graceful? Isn't that beautiful? Blah, 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 blah. What you're not seeing is what's happening underneath the water. And what you're not seeing underneath the water specifically is how much leg kick it requires to actually sustain that movement forwards, so the swimmer doesn't actually stall and pause in the water there. And you know, it's hugely important, because obviously the last thing you want to be doing as a triathlete is pausing and stalling in rough, choppy water because you lose your momentum. And then added to that, the last thing you want to be doing is kicking like, you know, Ian Thorpe, just to try and keep yourself moving forwards. It's a recipe for disaster, basically. So the Overglider is an interesting one. It's what most people hear about when they, you know, if they Google SwimSmooth or see some of our articles and videos online. We do talk a lot about the Overglider, and again, it's not a particular bash on a particular swimming program. It's because 42% of the athletes that we see on a daily basis come to us because they are Overgliders, and they're a bit sick and tired of not making improvements that they think they should have done. You know, I mentioned a subtype beforehand. We do see many Arnies recognize themselves fighting the water. They'll pick up on this notion, oh, it's really simple, just reduce the number of strokes you're taking, glide more, rotate, swim on your side like a fish, etc. But ultimately they'll often become what we call Arnie Overgliders. So you can still see that frustration and a very type A driven type of person sort of thing, but they'll be sort of pausing and gliding now because they're trying to make, you know, almost swim with like a catch-up style of stroke. So anyway, that's your lane 2 swimmers, the Kicktastics and the Overgliders. And then your top swimmers, the smooth probably needs no introduction. It is your technically picture perfect looking freestyle swim stroke. So people who really fit the smooth mold are people who can consistently swim at under 120 per 100 meters. They're very quick swimmers. They'll often have, even though they look very, very smooth, they'll often tend to gravitate towards the shorter events. So we get a lot of like masters swimmers coming into the programs who want to get good at open water swimming. They've got these beautiful, long, smooth freestyle strokes. They're not pausing and gliding as such like the Overglide would be doing, but they've got this beautiful long stroke, and they can power it on for a short period of time, but maybe they haven't done the right type of training to do the really long stuff. And they sit alongside what we call our swinger fraternity. So, I mentioned the Brownlee brothers there, and Alistair's turning up this week at the end of the week, actually down here in Perth to race Ironman WA, which is quite exciting.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'll be catching up with him when he's over here. And the crazy thing is, you mentioned personality earlier on, and I have to beat the drum a little bit for the swinger because I am a swinger myself. As a kid, I would have definitely been coached as a smooth, no question, classic high elbow, longer stroke, stronger leg kick, etc. But I'm not particularly tall, Rob. I'm only, about 5'9", 5'10"-ish. I haven't got particularly long arms, I've got tiny feet, size 7 UK feet, actually, and tiny little hands as well. So I literally can't produce the power and the force to generate this really long freestyle swim stroke. I used to try to, because I used to think, well, that's what I've got to do, because that's what they're telling me. But as I got into triathlon, I started to excel really quite nicely in open water swimming, and really the rougher it got, the better I got. And I started to put two and two together about the type of stroke that I must have. So my stroke doesn't look particularly pretty. I've got a straighter arm recovery over the top of the water. I've got quite a high turnover. When I swam around Manhattan, which is 48 kilometers, I averaged a stroke rate of 81 strokes per minute. Alistair's probably up in the about 92 strokes per minute, for example, but it's a 1500 meter swim. So both of those numbers, anything 80 and above, is quite a high stroke rate, but it's the stroke rate which sort of suits me, given my height and my build. And I swim with a 2-beat leg kick these days as opposed to the 6-beat, because just never really get on with the 6-beat leg kick. The 2-beat feels beautiful. It feels quite aerobic and quite balanced for me. And it just goes well. And I think over the years, you asked me just before we came on the show, where did this all start from? Where did this idea came from? And I can pinpoint exactly where swim types came from. And it was working with the very first athlete I ever started coaching. It was a guy called Harry Wiltshire. I don't know if you've had him on the show, but I'm sure
yes, we have. I'm so glad you brought him up. Yeah, go on, talk about Harry's stroke, because he's a classic to use on the coach education course, to show a video and go, how would you coach this athlete?
Well, I'll tell you how you coach that athlete, because I know from experience you coach the athlete by keeping a bit of hands off, to be honest with you, because I did the wrong thing. I had hands on initially. So when I started coaching, I was working for British Triathlon, or BTA as it was then, as their youth development officer or talent ID officer, whatever you want to call it. It was my third year at university doing sports science down in Bath. And somebody said, right, you've got to go out and do this sort of sweep of the Southwest and try and identify some talent for triathlon. And somebody said, there's this really good kid. He's called Harry. He's a good swimmer. Doesn't really know much about biking or running yet, but we think he could be quite good. Go and check him out. But just be warned, he's got a woeful stroke. And so I went down to Blandford Forum down in Dorset there and checked him out. And he was swimming sort of like 440-ish, maybe a little bit quicker than that for 400 freestyle. But my goodness, did his stroke look a little bit strange. And in my head at that point, I would have only been, like 19 or 20. So we are talking about 20 odd years ago here, and still very much under the influence of the coaching courses that I've been doing and the books that I've been reading and, all that sort of stuff. And what I've heard from coaches in the past, I looked at it and thought, oh God, if he could swim a lot smoother and refine his stroke and tweak his stroke here, wouldn't he be so much better? I thought the same thing, that all those coaches that you're working with on those training courses, I thought the same thing. So I did that. I tried to change it. We tried to do high elbow drills. We did this. We lengthened him out. We slowed him down. And you know what? He just got slower. It didn't work at all. And I didn't just try it for like a week and then give up on it, but I started to question it. I was like, why isn't this working for him? Why does he still want to revert back to this stroke? And could that stroke be beneficial for him? He hadn't even done any open water swimming at this point, but I was thinking, well, could this be better? So we sort of, rather than actually trying to change him and mold him into something he wasn't, we just tried to endorse the strengths that he had. And, as history goes on to show, he actually went over a little bit later on when I graduated and moved over to Australia. He went off and worked with Brett Sutton in Switzerland. And I'm sure for your listeners who followed any of Brett's stuff as well, Brett's not interested in necessarily the most perfectly pretty freestyle stroke, as nor am I. It's got to be effective and it's got to be efficient for that particular swimmer. So, Brett sort of endorsed what he was already doing well, as opposed to fundamentally trying to change him. And, he's got this, it is very easy to spot in the open water, perfectly straight arm recovery, which tends to suit him quite well in the rough open water, especially with a wetsuit on and stuff. And for me, I can pinpoint it because I thought about it right there and then. I didn't come up with swim types at that point, but I thought about it right there and then that, okay, well, this method, this one way that everybody's got to swim, here's one guy, my first experience of coaching somebody, and it hasn't really worked with him, but sticking with what he's got and refining what he's got has. So, the last time I actually did some coaching with Harry was right before the London Olympic Games, when he had one of the potential spots with Tim Don and Will Clark. As history tells us, obviously Stuart Hayes picked up that spot to help the Brownlees, but Harry was one of those 4 athletes who they were looking at to take as a domestique. And we just did a little bit of work on refining his catch. Swingers can sometimes over rev a little bit on their stroke rate, so stroke rate can go up a bit too high, and they do lose a little bit their front end. And Harry was finding that at the start of the race. He had no problem from 300 meters on staying with the group, but it was danger time in that first 300 meters, and he just felt like he was spinning his wheels a little bit. So we did a little bit of work trying to improve that catch and pull through at the front. But fascinating, and still friends with Harry to this day, and really it paved the way for everything that we've done with SwimSmooth. Just like looking to question things, not for questioning's sake, but just to get to think a little bit more about, okay, well, is this really the best way to be done, just because that's how it's been told in the past.
Now, one of the things that I really loved from being on your course was how much of this you took this away from coaching strokes and you made it about personalities. And and you played almost a bit of, I don't want to give away too many of your tricks for people who've not been on your courses, because I'd say if people get a chance to go on your courses, like, take it, because it's one of the most interesting experiences. But I think, without giving anything away, one of the things I got from watching you was, as you sat down with people at the start of the course, I realised now what you were trying to do was learn a little bit about people's personalities.
Definitely.
And in your head, I think something we haven't quite touched on is how people's personalities can actually but how people's personalities reveal to you what kind of swimmer they probably are and where they fit in the category system. And how accurate you were at kind of having, I thought it was a bit of a parlor trick. You can guess the kind of swimmer they were going to be before you actually saw them in the water.
Yeah. It's amazing how well it works and stuff. And you should never judge a book by its cover. But we're here to sort of educate coaches, especially when we work on the coach education course, about how you can use some key marker points, if you like, to start to think about, okay, how is this person in that 2 or 3 minutes chat that you have before you get them in for a video, and you're asking them a little bit about their swimming, what you think holds them back, etc. Are there any clues in that first 2 or 3 minute chat which might pertain to show you this is what that swimmer is going to look like when you jump into the water? And you might be wrong. You might be completely wrong. Okay, or you might end up being pleasantly surprised because that swimmer has done a little bit of background reading already and they've refined things. And you might have somebody talking to you and you think this guy's definitely going to be an Arnie, but you look at them and they're swimming a lot smoother than you think they're going to be, and that's a pleasant surprise. But no, definitely not a parlor trick as such. And it's an interesting thing because we're running one of these courses in Mallorca in May just recently, and we had quite a senior coach on the course. And I'd struck up quite a good rapport with this particular coach during the 3-day course. And on the end of the second day, we've been talking about, we basically give the coaches a series of video files that they've got to look through, identify which swim type the swimmer is that they've got in front of them, and then also suggest a couple of ways, some drills to help each of those swimmers. And the first part of that is we have 6 video files and there's one for each type basically, and the coaches have to agree in groups of 3 or 4 about which swim type they have in front of them. Some of them are very easy, some of them very hard, and then they've got to do one final one where they analyze that swimmer a little bit deeper. Now, I say to all of these coaches, the biggest disadvantage that they've got doing this exercise over what I have as an advantage is simply that I've actually met those swimmers before they've done the video. I've met them for 2 or 3 minutes. I've had a chat with them. They haven't got that. They've just got the raw video file and they're just looking at it purely out of that. Now, that first 2 or 3 minute chat is hugely beneficial for just sort of really understanding how somebody ticks. And if you can modify your coaching style and your communication style with the swimmers, then you're going to have a much, much better session. So I mentioned earlier on that the Bambinos are often quite nervous and anxious. If you go in there hardball and start talking about, oh, I used to coach so-and-so, and I used to do this, and I used to do that, and they're just going to close off because they can't relate with that particular type of athlete that you're talking with. But if you mention that, I worked with Sue last week, and Sue was struggling a little bit with her breathing as well, and, don't worry, it'll be fine, and we'll just take our time, step by step, blah, 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 blah. That's going to really appeal very, very nicely. And you change your tone, you change your communication style. I was once told that can't be done, and that you should, the swimmer needs to mold to the coach. I think that's total bullshit as well, to be honest with you. I believe it's possible, and I think it's your duty to be able to sort of pick up on these cues and work towards the swimmer, and just show some empathy, if you like, for how they're actually responding to you. So on this particular course, anyway, with this particular coach over in Mallorca, as you probably appreciate, Rob, you did this course nearly 10 years ago, and over the years, when it was 10 years ago, it was very new, was all of this. Swim types was super new. And I mentioned earlier on that I was really nervous about releasing it because nothing like that had been done before. I was thinking I'm going to get a lot of questions, going to get a lot of skepticism, but gradually over the years it's been applied more and more, and the course to this point now, whereby we don't actually do the swim type system on the course, we actually give it as a little bit of homework before they come on the course. Because most people know the system now, and we want to spend more time in the pool doing drills and stroke correction, etc. Anyway, at the end of day two, this coach right in front of everybody just stood up and said, "This is a load of bullshit. These are all Barnum statements. You can't relate personality to swimming style, and it's a load of rubbish. And now you're using confirmation bias to convince all of these coaches here in front of you." Yep, totally straight up. Using confirmation bias to convince everybody that what you're saying is gospel, and you can't prove it. And if you can't prove it, and if you haven't got a scientific paper, then you shouldn't be telling any of this to any of these swimmers. And I was totally taken aback, and I was like, I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff that we've had going on this year, but I've had major back issues. I've been in hospital 7 times now this year, and I was there over in Mallorca in a fragile state as it was. On lots of painkillers and stuff, and this guy said this to me in front of everybody who I'd sort of spent 2 days with, building up rapport with, and I was just like poleaxed. I was like, holy, what? How do I respond? How do I come back from it? And the only way I could respond was I said, I base everything I do on empirical research. I can't prove any of this, but I don't feel like I need to prove any of this. This is a going in point for you as coaches to take on board what you want. So you don't have to call people Arnies and Bambinos, Overgliders and Smooths or what have you. You just use it as a basis point, a starting point to help improve your swimming. So I said, let's put it to the test tomorrow. So I partnered him up with somebody on the following day, and it was quite heated. Was that discussion? Unfortunately, put a bit of a negative spin on everything. But he ended up partnering up with somebody who was a pure overglider of the highest regard, sort of thing. And I was able. I told him he would be. We had this questionnaire for this guy before he came on. I'd never met this guy before. I told this coach that his swimming would be an overglider. He turns up and sees it straight away that this guy's an overglider. I then speak to this guy in overglider language, i.e. quite technical, giving him the graphs and the charts and the stats and all the maths and all the stuff that he wants to hear. I know exactly which course he's done prior to coming on a SwimSmooth course. I talked to him about that, and he's like, "How the hell do you know that?" And I said, because I've seen it before many times, and I know how to improve it. So we worked with him on improving it, and this particular coach was then in charge of seeing this guy through this stroke correction process, and this guy ended up shaving off 15 seconds 100 off his threshold pace. It was like in a session.
Wow. Yeah,
like it was an amazing example of how strong that is. And I wasn't expecting an apology from the day before or anything like that, but he came up to me, he goes, "I just can't believe," the coach said, "just can't believe how well you knew everybody and knew everybody's names, and were able to sort of pick up what they were going to do and how quickly you move through that whole process." And I felt like saying, that's what I've been trying to tell you the last 2 days, is picking up those points. Anyway, so I thought that was all over, but then I got a really strong email from him the next day, which I never responded to, just saying, "Look, I think you've got a duty not to use Barnum statements and confirmation bias, and I think it's all wrong," and da da da. And I was like, some people you just can't I'm not going to be able to change everybody to thinking in the way that we think, but for the other coaches, the other 19 coaches on that particular course, and the other 69 coaches who we had this year, they have found it beneficial, and it has helped them with their own coaching, and that's what we're all about ultimately.
The thing that I really love about your system is exactly what you keep coming back to. It's coaching people rather than coaching a stroke. And if you can give coaches and athletes a way to understand kind of where they fit in the spectrum and within a framework, and some common faults and some common personality traits, and then some common fixes that tend to help. Mm-hmm. One of the things I really love about working on the British Triathlon Coach Ed courses is the light that comes on new coaches' eyes when they're really nervous about coaching swimming, because they come in and think it's this massive, massive subject, and it is. There's a million different things that can be going on, and everything's different. You give them a framework and say, if someone's doing that, then this will fix it, and people go, oh, Jack, our club's going to love this. The classic thing for me was I was on your course and I totally self-identified as an overglider. I was too analytical. I was looking at all the data. I'd read all the books. I'd read the yellow book that had turned me into an overglider. And I was thinking, I read this book, but, this guy's saying that this isn't right. And you showed a little video of, look at this guy's leg kick, the classic splayed legs behind him in the water. Yeah. How are we going to fix this? And everyone said, but they've got a rubbish kick. They need to kick more to get out of it. And you said, no, we're going to move the hand away from the front of the head and we're going to straighten them up. And it's that whole idea of cause and effect. Cause is a problem. And it isn't the effect that you see needs fixing. It's the cause needs fixing, and it goes away. And, just the other day I did a video analysis with somebody, and he looked just like I used to 10 years ago. And I thought, this is hilarious. It's come around completely full circle. I'll just give him
That's awesome.
the same tips Paul gave me a decade ago.
That's awesome. So they're still out there, Rob, those overgliders. They've still got some work to be done and all that. And I think the thing is with the whole cause and effect, that's very much, maybe, I'm sure most of us are logically thinking, in day-to-day stuff, what that might be the effect that you're seeing, but what's actually causing it? A lot of that's really come from, my wife's a sports physio, specialized in shoulder pain and management and stuff, and she says, that's how physios work. Is somebody might come into you complaining about a bad back, but is it really their back that's the problem, or is there knee out of alignment, or ankle, or what have you? So they look down the whole kinetic chain, and I think, just like I mentioned, just had this couple from Birmingham do this session with me this morning. We did back-to-back video analysis sessions. So I actually did the filming one after the other, and then the analysis one after the other. And we sat down. We actually sat down for an hour and 10 minutes doing the video analysis, so 35 minutes each, basically. And it wasn't a particularly complicated analysis either. They were both classic unilateral breathers and just needed to do a little bit of refinement on that aspect of their stroke. But it was quite an in-depth conversation. And I find it's quite useful to have that in-depth conversation with the athlete to make them really understand, look, okay, there's a million different ways to skin this cat. Like you said, there's a million different things that could be wrong with somebody's stroke. Okay. However, if you can understand what is causing what, and then focus and pick out the 2 or 3 key areas of the stroke by using that system, then you're going to be onto a much simpler task, not just for you as a coach, but obviously for the swimmer as well. So I like to sort of finish every video analysis that I do with the swimmers and say, look, if you were going to sit down this afternoon for a coffee with a good mate and they asked you, what did you do this morning? And you told them, I went for a video analysis with this funny English guy who's got a really weird accent and doesn't really know where he comes from anymore. If you're going to go and sit down with him, what would you tell your friend about what you've learned about your stroke today? And they've got to just keep it to 1 or 2 key points. So they'll tell me a couple of things, we'll maybe refine it. I said, and that's what I want you to go away with today, is just that coffee conversation. I don't want you to go away with all the different stats and the numbers that we looked at, etc. You've got all that on a recorded analysis, so you can always go back to it. But in your head, you need this very, very clear pathway of just, a couple of things that are going to make the difference. And, I think doing the analysis to a good depth, but then summarizing to that is hugely important.
Absolutely. Now, you touched on earlier on stroke rates, and you gave yourself as an example at 81 and Ali Brownlee at 92.
Yeah.
One thing I found really useful was the way you use those little beepers with
Yes.
these swimmers. So,
Yeah.
oh, look at that. That's clever timing. That's that's genuinely
Is
my
that one
alarm
there? Is
going
that, oh, it's
off.
your alarm. Okay, good timing. Yeah.
Great timing, universe.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, the idea of the metronome in the water and how that can help swimmers out, because again, that's such a simple and cheap little tool somebody can buy that can be so effective for them.
It is, yeah, exactly. So it's a Finney's tempo trainer, and when they were originally devised, these tempo trainers only had one mode, and it was for stroke rate. The Americans refer to stroke rate usually in stroke cycles per minute. So if you've got, for example, somebody swimming at 60 strokes per minute, as we would refer to it as, the American literature often refers to it as it takes 1 second to complete each stroke. So the tempo trainer originally was set up as, for example, you turn it on, you put in 1.00, and you're going to hear the beep every second. Now, if you wanted to know what 54 strokes per minute would be, well, then you'd have to divide 60 strokes per minute down into 54 strokes per minute to give you the number to actually enter into the tempo trainer. So, little bit confusing. It still does the same thing. But when you're coming from a running and biking, triathlon background, where cadence is always expressed in cycles per minute, or cadence is revolutions per minute or whatever, it just made sense for me to always refer to it as strokes per minute, and slightly differently to pedaling on the bike. So if you're at 90 RPM on the bike, that's 90 times your right leg goes around in a minute. When we're talking about swimming, just for a little bit of clarity here, if we're talking about Ali Brownlee doing 92 strokes per minute, that's his right arm completing 1, his left arm 2, his right arm 3, his left arm 4, etc. So in some literature, you will see somebody like Brownlee being quoted as having a stroke rate of 46 strokes per minute, which is, we sort of refer to that as like quite extreme overgliding. It's not. That would be 46 times his right arm would go around in a minute.
Oh, yeah.
The reason we do that, and just for this clarity purposes, is that if you've done any sort of stroke counting in the past, where you've been asked by the coach to count how many strokes you do per lap, that coach will be asking you not how many times your right arm goes in the course of a length. It'll be right for 1, left for 2, right for 3, left for 4, etc. So we've just tried to simply mesh those up and make sure we're dealing with the same sort of numbers. But anyway, the tempo trainer is great because you can turn it on to, so we went to Finis and said, look, can you put us a mode where it is strokes per minute? Yep, no problem. They brought it out, it's probably about 10 years ago now, actually, the Tempo Trainer Pro, when it came out, the yellow one. Mode 3 actually deals with whole seconds, or whole strokes per minute, I should say. So you can dial in 72 strokes per minute or 48 strokes per minute or what have you. But the interesting thing with this is that we've got a chart on our website. So if you just Google SwimSmooth and stroke rate, it'll come straight up, which aims to look at, okay, if you're swimming at 140 per 100, what is the stroke rate range you should be within to be effective and efficient? Because you can probably imagine it's a little bit like a continuum. Some people have a stroke which is too short, genuinely too short, and their stroke rate is too high, i.e. they're fighting and bashing against the water. These will typically be your Arnies and some of the more exuberant swingers, or the swimmer, I should say, might have a stroke which is too long and too slow. So there's typically your overgliders and maybe some of your smooths potentially as well. So the stroke is too long, stroke rate is too slow. And then we have this nice sort of white zone in the middle where you are at the right sort of tempo for your given swimming speed. Now, we express that as a bit of a range, and that range is around about 10 to 12 strokes per minute. The reason that range actually exists is to account for different people's heights and builds. So let's say, for argument's sake, we've got an overglider. So somebody comes to you, here's your swimmer who's doing you 28 strokes per lap, and he's doing 33 strokes per minute. He's going to be way off our chart, actually, off to the left-hand side, doing about 2 minutes 30 per 100. But let's just say you've got somebody like that. Now, there's a right way and a wrong way to fix his stroke. The wrong way to fix his stroke is to say 33 strokes per minute, according to this chart, is too slow for you. It needs to be about 51 and above. So you could take out the Tempo Trainer Pro, and remember, this is the wrong way to do it. Take out the Tempo Trainer Pro, put it to 51 and say, there you go, mate, swim down the pool and make sure your hand enters into the water each time the beep goes. Now, that is going to be disastrous for that swimmer, and it's also going to make them believe, A, that you're wrong, and B, that everything they've been doing, which hasn't been helping them, is still going to be the way forwards. And what I mean by that is that if you were to drive down the freeway with your handbrake still on, okay, and drive at 60 miles per hour down the freeway or the motorway, M62, whatever it might be, sort of thing, and you've got that handbrake on, you're going to be burning up a lot of fuel. The reason an overglider is going to struggle to raise stroke rate before you've actually corrected the stroke is because the reason the stroke rate is slow is because of what's going on within the stroke. Yeah. So you've got to fix the stroke. You've got to eliminate the dead spot. You've got to make sure the brakes aren't going on. And if you can do that, then the stroke rate will naturally start to come up. And this one particular example, which I often use, is use him online a lot and in our book, etc. This guy, 28 strokes per lap, 33 strokes per minute, swimming 2 minutes 30 per 100. At the end of one session, we had him swimming around about 13 or 14 seconds per 50 meters quicker than what he was at the start. So nearly 30 seconds, 100 quicker at the end of the session than at the start. But he actually went home disappointed because he was taking 3 more strokes to complete each lap, even though he said he felt easier and he was 30 seconds, 100 quicker, just like ludicrous, basically. Now, he went away and thought about that, as most overgliders do, for about 4 years before he came back for a follow-up session. When he came back, I'm pleased to say he was swimming a lot better, but he said it was a big hurdle for him to actually step over and, you know, discard that worldview which he'd so closely clung on to after having read the Yellow Book, because that's what he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that this longer, smoother stroke, this pause and rest, as he said, I like to have a little rest between strokes. Physically, it's just from a physics perspective, it's just not effective or efficient at all. You're going to decelerate. If you stop and stall, you're going to decelerate and slow down. It's going to be much harder to actually continuously re-accelerate the stroke, especially when you're in a moving body of water like the ocean or a river or something like that. So, so tempo training is really good. The way you can actually work it is I'll often do what we call a stroke rate ramp test in a follow-up session with a swimmer. So on the first session with the swimmer, I'll do the analysis. I'll work out what they need to do to refine their stroke. We'll do some work on that. The follow-up session, I'll actually do a ramp test if they need it. So the people I do a ramp test with are either the swimmers with a stroke which is too short and too fast or too long and too slow. The ramp test basically involves you starting at around about 6 or 8 strokes per minute slower than where they're at that point for their natural stroke rate. And then every 50 meters, just increasing the tempo trainer by about 2 or 3 strokes per minute. And you just measure the speed that they're swimming at, how many strokes they're doing per lap, what they feel like out of 10, so how hard out of 10 was it, and any sort of subjective feeling they had from that lap. And you can then sort of plot this out in a graph. It usually creates like a sort of a bell curve where somebody will get faster and faster and faster up until a point where they won't get any faster at all, but they'll just start to feel like it's a lot harder. And you can sort of work back from that point and work out where that ideal point is for that particular swimmer. And that's quite a cool thing for people to do.
Yeah, it's a fantastically eye-opening exercise, that, because again, it's coming back to a number isn't right for all people.
That's right.
A different number is right for different people, and you can find this range that you're a lot more comfortable at. I remember getting to the point really clearly where I was like, okay, 58 seems to be what's working for me. I physically couldn't swim at 60 beats a minute. And I was thinking, well, this is ridiculous. It's only 2 more beats per minute. You know, that's hardly anything. And I can't get my arms to move around this fast and still feel like I'm swimming. And that was the light bulb moment of, oh, all right, well, something's clearly going on here, that it's not the 2 stroke per minute increase that's been the problem. It's obviously something going on in the stroke.
In the stroke, yeah, exactly right. And, you know, there's a threshold for everything as well, you know. So, I mean, there's a threshold for, we talk about critical swim speed being as the physiological threshold for the pace that you might be able to sustain for a 1,500 meter swim. And if somebody is 121 per 100 meters, they're not 120 per 100 meters. Interesting enough, we had Joe Skipper over here staying with me for about 2 months last Christmas, and great bloke, and obviously done great there in Florida. As per your recent podcast there, Rob, which was fantastic. Loved listening to Joe again. Yeah, it was great, really good. And Joe's, as you mentioned on the podcast, one of the things that fascinates you and really makes Joe very appealing to listen to and to follow is how he's always experimenting and wanting to get better. So Joe's been following our SwimSmooth guru and the stuff that we do online for quite some time. And so he was very well versed in things like our red mist endurance sessions, which he's an absolute beast at, as you can probably imagine. He knew he wanted to get his speed up. So the CSS development sessions are aimed at helping with that. And yeah, he'd been there for a little while. He came maybe, I think it was about a month after Kona, and he had lost a little bit of fitness, and we gave him a few sessions and he soon came back up to speed. And he said to me, what do you think my threshold pace is right now? I said, I reckon it's about 122 per 100. How do you know that? I said, we haven't done a CSS test. I said, well, when you work with people on a regular basis and you give them the sort of sets that you've been doing and you monitor what they're able to maintain, you get a good feeling for where that pace actually is. And he said, well, let's test it. So he got out his Lactate Pro, and which he'd been given, and we did a proper test with him and Laura, where we did the classic 7/200 step test, which basically, for the listeners who don't know this, back before people were regularly doing CSS. So a lot of people assume CSS is something that we've invented. It's not. It's something which we popularized. So when I got into using a power meter on the bike myself in 2006, I loved what Hunter Allen and Andy Coggan were doing with power on the bike and FTP and training stress scores and stuff like that. And I thought, well, there must be something in the literature that allows the everyday Joe, excuse the pun, the everyday Joe to be able to do something to test their threshold pace in swimming without necessarily having to do an expensive laboratory test with blood lactate analysis and all this sort of stuff. So I did the research, and critical swim speed's been out there since around about 1991. It used to be calculated as a 50-meter sprint and a 400-meter time trial, but some of the more contemporary research has suggested that you'll get a better result from a 200 and a 400. The 400 looking at how good you are aerobically, and the 200 takes a little bit more of the anaerobic component, and you're looking at the rate of drop-off between the two. Anyway, somebody like Joe, who's a beast of a diesel engine in all sports, is going to have a very low drop off between his 400 and 200, which sort of stunts him a little bit in terms of speed, outright speed, especially as he mentioned there in Florida. He was fine on that first lap, but once he dropped the feet, because it all got a bit chaotic, he was in no man's land, and he was in a bit of trouble and lost a bit of time there on the swim. He's a lot better at swimming than people give him credit for, to be honest with you. And that's a tactical thing more than a technique or a physiological thing that he suffered with there in Florida, in my opinion. But anyway, so somebody like Joe is going to be, he's just going to annihilate that. And all the Red Mist endurance sessions he did over here in Perth, he was really, really solid at. Anyway, so we did this 7/200 step test, and we got out the expensive. I don't know if I'm assuming you've used them, Rob, the Lactate Pros, but each one of these little lactate strips, these paper strips, which are tiny, cost about £2. So Joe opened up a box and he had about 300 strips in this bloody box, and he said, right, okay. So I was like right back to my sports science days. I hadn't done a lactate test for so long, and Laura, his wife, being a medic sort of thing, she's right, okay, I'll do this and I'll do that. But we still wasted about 4 or 5 of these strips. There's 10 quid's down the drain already before we even started. And the idea is you do this step test. So this, first and foremost, the disadvantage of this particular test is it's very expensive, as always sort of lent towards. The actual monitor is very expensive in itself. And it also requires brilliant pacing. So you've got to work basically back from maximum speed over 200, and then each of the prior 200s have to be a little bit slower. So you start really slow, and they have to progressively get a little bit faster. But if your pace awareness is not great, then you might go too quick on number 3, and it sends your lactate too high, and then it doesn't come down again. And then number 4, and the whole test is a little bit sort of ambiguous there at that point. Anyway, Joe did this test, and Joe is very good at pacing and did get a very good result. So I'd said that I reckon it's 122 per 100 meters, which equates to 20.5 per 25 meters on the Tempo Trainer Pro in mode 1. And that's what we've been using for all the pacing. Anyway, I did this test, and we sent it over to Professor Plews, Dr. Plews, Dr. Daniel Plews, obviously, who won Kona last year as an age grouper and set the world record over in Kona. Friend of mine. Legend. We sent it over to him for a little bit of I just wanted to make sure I got my numbers right, because when I looked at the result, I was thinking, I can't surely have been that close, but it was 121.8 per 100 meters. So the difference between doing a very, very fancy test and just using gut instinct and a little bit of science and a practical field test, if you like, in that case for Joe, somebody who's very well versed in his training matters sort of thing, it was 0.2 of a second per 100 meters, which can be the difference between, just feeling good one day and not feeling quite so good. In fact, it'd probably be more than that. So yeah, you can get some very good results from that. And it was great working with Joe on that, and we had some good fun times training together. Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, listen, we need to wrap this up at this point, I think. Thanks so much for coming along and giving us so much of your time. It's really kind of you. Before we wrap this up, let's just give people a chance. You've got so much good information out there. let's go through your website, resources, your books, your things like that, where people can find out more if they want to learn about these systems.
Yeah, thanks. So probably, I mean, the gateway to it all, if you like, is swimsmooth.com, where we started out. We do have a book which is available through Amazon, and I think it's I like to toot the old trumpet a little bit. 5-star rating. The book has done well over the years.
It's a fantastic book, mate. It's something I make
Thanks.
all my students buy on the Coach Ed courses. It's their homework.
Oh, brilliant! That's awesome. I love. Me and Adam wrote it collaboratively, and we basically took. I think there's 26 chapters in there or something like that. And we took a chapter each, and then so I'd write chapter 1, he'd write chapter 2. Then we both edit each other's chapter, and then move on to the next one and stuff. And yeah, it was a great piece of collaboration there. So we've got the book, we've got our online coaching platforms, the SwimSmooth Guru, just available at swimsmooth.guru. So it's like a subscription service. But then we freely provide our material for all the coaches at both British Triathlon and the ITU, the International Triathlon Union. So most of what we've been talking about today has been rolled out in 119 countries around the world through the ITU. And then we also have our premium coaching service, if you like, which is our certified coaches. So these are coaches like Emma Brunning, who've come over to me in Perth and spent 2 weeks training with us over here, and then around about 12 to 18 months worth of mentorship before they go on to become a certified SwimSmooth coach. So there's still not, we've got 50 of them around the world. There's still not enough of them. We still get people saying, why haven't you got somebody here? And why haven't you got somebody there? And it's just a matter of time and resources really to develop the quality that we need to maintain that and move it forward. So yeah, those are the big things where people can find us. We're on Twitter and the usual places, just usually at SwimSmooth, and you can follow us there as well.
Fantastic stuff, mate. Thank you so much. And thanks for all the hard work you've done over the years. I think you've made a massive, massive contribution to both coach education, but also in ways that people can help, people like myself. You helped massively in the early days on TriTalk, and having seen you grow this out into a system with websites and books is brilliant. And I think it's the best set of resources out there for people to improve the swimming. So it's great for me to have the chance to have you on the show and be able to say thank you in person.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. You invited me on, Rob. It's been great chatting with you, and hopefully I didn't go off on too many tangents as I'm prone to doing.
It's been brilliant, mate. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries at all. No problem.
All right, great. I hope we can have you on again in the future, my friend.
Thank you very much, Rob.
So I hope you enjoyed that. As you can hear, Paul is a wealth of information about coaching swimming. As I said to him, I really think he's the leading swim coach in the world because his manner of approaching things and just the sheer number of athletes that he's done video analysis on over the years, and the fact he's a full-time professional swim coach gives him the credential, I think, that when he talks, I certainly listen, and I think there's tons there that we can take away. Now, as we mentioned at the end of the interview there's a whole bunch of resources I'm going to link to in the show notes, so you can just go there and I highly recommend his book, the SwimSmooth book. I recommend it to all the athletes that come on the coach education courses that I run. It's one of the best all-round coaching manuals, let alone just for swimming. So check that out, and also check out the website. There's loads of free stuff on there on the Swim Types website. The videos that they've got on there are well worth watching. And if you've never seen yourself on video, my advice to you is just to get a friend, get permission first, get a friend to video you swimming just from above the water, and you can get an idea for what you're actually doing. And it's amazing the difference it makes actually seeing your swim stroke on video, and then go back and compare it against some of these swim types and think, am I an Overglider? Am I a Kicktastic? Am I a Bambino? And here are the easy fixes for those things that you might be doing. Like I said in the interview, I had this horrible splayed leg kick when I went on this course in 2010. I tried all manner of different coaches and no one had managed to fix it. And Paul's advice virtually fixed it overnight. It's not overstating it to say how incredible the effect of his coaching knowledge was on my swim stroke. So yeah, can't recommend it highly enough. Thanks so much, Paul, for taking the time to come on. Now, next up, a shout out for our sponsors, Thriver.co. Thriver do this at-home finger prick blood test. So it's dead simple. You order it and it comes through the post. You do a little finger prick against the side of your finger and you squeeze out about 7 or 8 drops of blood into a vial. It took me less than 5 minutes the first time I did it, just to get the box open, read the instructions, do the test, and then you post it back to them. It's really cool because it's personalized as well. So you can choose from an entire range of different tests that are on their site, things like red blood cell count, cholesterol, hormone levels, red blood cells, vitamin B12, all the vitamin different levels. It's been really important for me trying to get my health back on track from suffering with, serious fatigue over the last year. And it looks like I'm getting some real answers out of this. So I've really managed to get my vitamin B12 levels headed in the right direction, following some great advice from a doctor. And leading on from this, I'm going to have a special coming up in a couple of weeks' time with the doctor that I've been working with to try and sort out my health issues, which I think is going to be really interesting. And a couple of you so far have said to us, here's my blood tests. I've had a Thriver test done. He'll have a look over it and give some generic advice based on what people can typically do to change these levels. Now, I had a consultation with him last week in preparation for us doing the podcast together, and it's been absolutely mind-blowing, eye-opening, the sort of nutritional facts he's given me. Now, none of this is based around should you be vegetarian or should you be carnivore or should you be low fat. It was just purely based on, here are some biochemical facts about food and about how our body digests it, and frankly about what you can digest and what you can't. Some of the supplements I was taking may as well have been Lego bricks, because although they had the vitamins in there, they're just not absorbable in that form by a human body. So it's just incredible what I've learned from this doctor. So that'll be coming out in a few weeks. You can listen out for that. And if you would like to have a look at your own vitamin levels or your own cholesterol level and things like that, get over to thrive.co, and for your first test, you can get £30 off just using the code OxygenAddict30. All right, so the last thing that I want to say today is obviously there's a glaring omission in the show, and the glaring omission is obviously that Hells is no longer here. I've put this out on Twitter and I've put it out on Facebook already, so a lot of you will already know this, but I know that a lot of you don't go on Facebook and Twitter. So what I'll do is I'll kind of go through what I put out on Twitter. Is that I'm really sad to announce that Helen's decided to leave the podcast. Obviously, she's been my co-host since day one on the show over the last 5 years. She's just brought so much happiness and laughter and entertainment and inspiration and motivation to so many people. Quite aside from her skill and fun as a co-host, I really believe, and from what people have written on Twitter, I think it's a very commonly held view, she is one of the most skilled, if not the most skilled interviewers in triathlon, and I think probably in sports media in general. Obviously, she came from a background of working for the BBC, and that skill has really been evident in the interviews that she's done. She's always asked open and interesting questions, and she's often got answers out of her interviews that I don't think anybody else could have got out of them. So she's going to be a tremendous loss to the show, that goes without saying. More than anything, I hold her in the highest regard for her professional attitude to the show and her unbelievable work ethic. It seemed like no matter how busy she was and no matter how many plates she had spinning, she always made the time to record the show each week. It was regardless of how early we needed to get up to fit it in. And over the last few months, she's been traveling down to London and getting up so that she can firstly do a training and then record the show before she gets on a train to get to London. This is from Cheshire, to get to London from Cheshire on the train to do a full day's work down there. So she was obviously having an awful lot of plates spinning. It takes tremendous guts to strike out on your own, and especially from the point of view of we've got this podcast to a really great place, and I completely respect her for that. I think for anyone who wants to go out and try and do something for themselves, I've got nothing but admiration for them, and that goes double for Helen. And on a personal level, I consider her a really, really good friend. I worked with Helen as an athlete and coached her for many years. I was looking back, and I think it was 2012 or 2013, so way back before we started the show, when I was working with her as an athlete. And obviously we've got a friendship that extends outside of the show itself. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to send her a tweet or a message on Facebook to say good luck. I know that she'll really appreciate that, and I know that we all wish her well. It's never easy to get to the end of something. It's never easy managing the transitions, but I wish her all the very best for the future. And I think it's also necessary for me to say, for the future of this show, I want to continue going on and bringing you a new episode each week full of news and results and pro interviews and all that kind of stuff. So this has all happened very fast. This show has been put out kind of a little bit last minute, to be honest with you. And I'm going to sit down over the next week and have a little bit of a plan. So hopefully I'll know a little bit more next week about what's going on. But I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you've enjoyed what we've put together over the past 5 years. And I hope you enjoy what we continue to put together over the coming years as well. So Hells, all the best to you in your future endeavours. Enjoy your breakaway, and I hope you have a great time. We look forward to seeing what you're up to when you come back. And as from me, thanks very much for listening, everybody. I'm Coach Rob Wilby. You've been listening to the Oxygen Addict Triathlon podcast, and hope you all have a safe training and racing week. I'll see you all again next week. Cheers, everyone. See ya.